On Halloween night in 2010, while kids in Ascot, Berkshire were running from door to door, laughing and shouting trick or treat, just a few houses away in a luxurious home on Millionaire's Row, a real nightmare was unfolding. Inside that house, a mother, 46-year-old Joanna Simpson, was brutally killed with a claw hammer, and her 2 children were playing in a room only 2 doors away from where she died. What makes this even more horrifying? Her killer wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a criminal on the run. He was her husband, a British Airways captain trusted with the lives of hundreds of passengers in the sky. This wasn't just a murder. It became one of the most disturbing true crime stories in the UK. A case where warning signs were ignored, the justice system failed, and in the end, the truth forced an entire legal system to change. Stay until the end, because what really happened is far more terrifying than anyone imagined. Before we step into the horrors that followed, we need to go back just for a moment and truly see the woman who paid for everything with her life. Because only when you understand who she was, will you feel the full weight of the brutality that was about to unfold. Joanna Simpson was never just a victim. She was the kind of person whose presence made a room feel brighter, whose warmth made others feel safe, protected, and loved. Born in 1964 and raised in a home overflowing with affection, Joanna carried a natural intelligence, a quiet gentleness, and a heart so open that anyone who met her felt its warmth long after she walked away. Friends called her a beam of sunlight, not because she smiled all the time, but because she made other people feel lighter. They said she was the person who makes you feel safe, the kind of woman who put everyone else's hurt above her own exhaustion. And above all, they called her an extraordinary mother because Joanna didn't just raise her children, she lived for them. She could turn the impossible into something beautiful. When she bought a run-down house with a leaking roof, cracked walls, and even a tree growing through the ceiling, she transformed it by hand into a warm, welcoming home, every corner marked by her persistence and quiet elegance. She opened a 5-star B&B, ran it meticulously, woke early to make breakfast, and still ended her nights reading stories with her children. She never missed a single birthday, not because of obligation, but because remembering those days was her way of saying, "I appreciate you." For anyone who needed help, Joanna showed up, not loudly, not for attention, but quietly, at exactly the moment you needed someone to catch you. A woman whose soul was this gentle, whose kindness ran this deep, was taken in the most savage way imaginable, inside the very home she had poured her life into. And the cruelest part? The people who loved her never imagined her name would one day be spoken in the same breath as the words, violent murder. Stay with me, because Joanna's story will not only make you angry, it will make you ask, how does someone like her end up in the crosshairs of darkness? And if you've ever known someone like Joanna, a person so good they could be easily hurt, tell me in the comments below as we move into the next chapter. Joanna's life began to shift in a completely different direction in 1998, when she met Robert Brown, a name that sounded steady, respectable, and tied to a profession everyone admired. Robert wasn't just a pilot. He was a British Airways captain, the man behind the controls of massive Boeing 747s, crossing tens of thousands of miles to Hong Kong, San Francisco, Los Angeles. A tall, calm, confident man wrapped in the aura of the skies can make anyone fall a little faster. And for Joanna, a woman guided by emotion and trust in the goodness of others, Robert's arrival felt almost like fate. But the problem with people who look perfect on the outside is that sometimes that perfection is just a shell, hiding something much darker underneath. From the moment her parents met Robert, they felt something was wrong. They sensed a coldness in him, a gaze that never truly softened, a quiet arrogance only perceptive people catch right away. Diana, Joanna's mother, said openly that he wasn't warm, wasn't friendly, that he watched people rather than connected with them, as if judging and dismissing everyone in the room. But Joanna was in love, and when a woman like her loves, she believes deeply in the good she hopes exists in the other person. Love happened fast, and the same red flags that alarmed others became to Joanna harmless quirks. Loving fast turned into marrying fast, and marrying fast meant she never saw what lay beneath the surface. Robert moved into her home almost immediately. The strange behaviors gradually got explained away by emotion. Then came the moment that many would call romantic, The moment that sounds like it belongs in a movie. The proposal. But the truth behind it was full of warning signs. Robert proposed to Joanna while he was flying a plane, literally mid-flight. A gesture that might seem unique or adventurous, but if you think deeper, it was reckless, calculated, showy, and utterly disrespectful to the safety of his job. Joanna still said yes, and just weeks later they were married. Everything happened too fast, too intense, too swept up in feeling. And that speed is exactly how dangerous people enter someone's life. Quickly. They move so fast that you never get time to think, because if you slow down even for 1 second, the signs become painfully obvious. But Joanna didn't slow down, and Robert's dark side began to reveal itself just days after the wedding. Stay with me, because what comes next are the first warning signs, the ones that if someone had truly seen them, might have changed everything. And if you've ever met someone who seemed too perfect to be real, tell me in the comments as we continue unraveling this story. After the wedding, things didn't get better the way Joanna once hoped. Instead, she began to withdraw in a way that the people closest to her noticed immediately. Joanna had always been open, full of life, the kind of woman who could lift the heaviness out of any room. Yet now, every time Robert was present, her body tensed. She became cautious, restrained, as if she were afraid something might explode at any moment. Her friends saw that she only seemed truly herself when he wasn't around, as if the real Joanna existed only in the moments when Robert wasn't standing in the same space. What's terrifying is how quietly that transformation happened, so quietly that even Joanna herself grew used to it, the same way someone slowly adapts to the cold before realizing they're standing in the snow. Joanna's father saw it clearer than anyone. He couldn't stop the wedding, but he could protect his daughter in the only way left. He insisted they sign a prenuptial agreement. It was his final shield, guarding Joanna's home, her assets, her safety. Robert signed it, but the look he gave as he put the pen down was enough to make anyone nearby feel the simmering anger beneath his skin. He didn't forget. And he certainly didn't forgive. Then, like so many controlling men, Robert started breaking Joanna down in the smallest ways. He isolated her from friends with excuses that sounded reasonable on the surface. They're not good for you. You should stay home more. I don't like them. Joanna, being kind-hearted, tried to keep the peace. But every time she compromised, Robert stepped further. Irrational jealousy took over. If Joanna spoke to any man, whether it was a neighbor, an old friend, even a work contact, Robert could erupt without warning. He yelled, threatened, blamed, twisting things until Joanna felt like she'd done something wrong. That's how psychological abuse works. The victim eventually believes the fault is theirs. Then came the emotional neglect. Robert worked long hours, and when he came home his face was cold, distant, as though the sight of his wife and children was nothing but an irritation. Sudden bursts of anger, doors slammed hard enough to shake the walls, sharp cutting remarks meant to wound piece by piece. The house that once echoed with Joanna's laughter became suffocating. And the most heartbreaking part? Joanna kept enduring it. She believed she could fix it. She believed every marriage had rough patches, but the warmth in that home was dying, like a candle being smothered by an invisible hand. Ask yourself this: if you were Joanna's friend at that time, would you have recognized these as signs of abuse? Leave a comment and stay with me, because what comes next is the moment everything shifts from control into violence. By 2007, the marriage had moved far beyond control and jealousy. It escalated into something even Joanna, someone who always tried to believe in the good inside people, could no longer soothe herself about. Robert was in Hong Kong on a work trip when he called her. His voice was flat, emotionless, almost like he was reading a flight schedule rather than saying something horrifying. "I'm thinking about killing you. Killing the kids. Then crashing the plane." Those words weren't a joke. They weren't said in a moment of frustration. They were the words of a man who had begun imagining wiping out everything, every life he was supposed to protect. Joanna listened with her hands shaking, but she still tried to ask if he was stressed from work. Deep down, though, she knew Robert wasn't trying to scare her. He was sending a message: "Your survival depends on me." The fear planted itself that night. But the real nightmare came later, one evening after Joanna brought the children home. The kitchen, once the place where she cooked, laughed, and danced with her kids, became the setting for something no mother should ever have to remember. Robert walked up behind her, wrapped his arm around her neck and pressed a knife against her chest. Just a thin sliver of space stood between the blade and her heart, and that space belonged entirely to his mood. Joanna knew that any panic, any wrong move, could end everything instantly. She used every ounce of calm she had ever cultivated to talk him down, word by word, breath by breath, until he slowly lowered the knife. She survived. But the part of her that believed she could fix this marriage, that part died in that kitchen. She knew she was living with a dangerous man. She knew she and her children were not safe. But she also knew something even more terrifying. If she reported him, if she confronted him, if she made him feel threatened, he might take her children, or do something even worse. People who've never lived through abuse often ask, why didn't she just leave? What they don't understand is that sometimes leaving is the most dangerous moment of all. Joanna understood that truth, and that fear kept her silent. A silence that later, an entire country would pay the price for. If you're still watching, what do you think Joanna should have done in that moment? Leave a comment, and follow me into the next part where this story turns into a fight for survival. After surviving the knife at her chest and the chilling phone call from Hong Kong, Joanna finally understood that this marriage could never be saved. She filed for divorce, a decision that might seem simple on the surface, but for someone living under the control of a man like Robert Brown, it was nothing short of declaring war. And exactly as expected, the moment Joanna stood up for herself, Robert's true nature exploded into view. He no longer pretended to be the responsible husband. No more polished mask of the successful airline captain. What emerged instead was the real Robert, a man obsessed with control, determined to destroy Joanna slowly, deliberately and with frightening precision. First, he cut every security camera Joanna had installed around the house, motion sensor lights. He ripped those out too. He wanted her to live in fear, stripped of any sense of safety. Then he bought tracking equipment and secretly attached it to Joanna's car. No matter where she went, who she met, or even where she paused for a moment, he knew. She had no privacy left. Her life belonged to him moment by moment. A woman who once lit up every room was now forced to live in the shadows of surveillance. But Robert didn't just want to monitor her. He wanted to break her spirit piece by piece. He sent threatening emails, made harassing phone calls, appeared in places she never expected, and constantly twisted reality until Joanna felt like she was somehow to blame. It was psychological torture, slow, suffocating, and brutally effective. Court hearings, paperwork, lawyers, financial battles. None of it lasted months. It dragged on for 3.5 years. 3.5 years of Joanna waking up every day to another round of manipulation and cruelty from the man she once trusted. 3.5 years of Robert lying, twisting the truth, painting her as a bad mother, a liar, a manipulator, while he was the one posing the greatest danger to the family. Joanna was exhausted. She broke down often. Some days the only thing that kept her standing was the sight of her 2 young children. But that, her love for them, was exactly what kept her fighting. She knew that if she surrendered, if she gave Robert even an inch, he would take the children, and he would poison their minds and hearts the same way he had tried to poison hers. She needed to survive. She needed to endure. She needed to fight all the way to the end. What do you think? In a divorce fueled by control and violence like this, did Joanna really have any other choice? Leave a comment and stay with me for the next part, the darkest chapter yet, when evil begins preparing for something far worse. On October 20th, 2010, an event that had nothing, at least on the surface, to do with Joanna's family, became the final drop that sent everything spilling over. The UK Supreme Court issued a historic ruling. Prenuptial agreements, the very document Joanna's father had insisted she sign all those years ago, were now officially recognized and must be strictly upheld. To most people, this was just a legal update, but to Robert Brown it was a death sentence for his twisted ego. Suddenly, it meant he wouldn't get a penny from the home Joanna had built with her own hands. No right to touch her assets, no way to flip the situation after 3.5 years of psychological warfare. He lost completely, and worse, he lost control. For a normal man, losing property is a setback, but for someone as obsessive as Robert, Losing control is losing the only reason he feels he exists. He had spent years breaking Joanna down, ensuring she could never rise up against him. And now, in one single Supreme Court declaration, everything he'd spent years manipulating collapsed instantly. Even more terrifying, the final court hearing, Joanna's moment of true freedom, was just 1 week away. 1 week until she would finally escape the man who had wrapped his hands around her throat, pressed a knife to her chest, stalked her, threatened her, and dismantled her life piece by piece. She had waited too long for this day, but that freedom awakened a darker force inside Robert. Experts in domestic abuse say one thing over and over: the most dangerous moment for a victim is not when they are being hit, threatened, or stalked. It's when they're finally about to leave. When an abuser realizes they're about to lose power, they do the one thing they believe will keep it: destroy the person trying to escape. Joanna had no idea she was standing on the edge of her own death. She only knew justice was finally coming to her side. But somewhere else, Robert Brown was making the decision that would shock the entire nation. If he couldn't have Joanna, then no one would. He would end everything before the court could save her. What do you think? If you saw a man losing control like this, would you believe he was capable of murder? Leave a comment and stay with me for the next part, where the plan for a brutal killing begins to take shape. This was no spur-of-the-moment act of rage. It was a meticulously drafted plan, and the cold traces of that calculation would later make anyone who read the files shiver. Robert Brown didn't rely on a sudden fit of anger. He prepared like a professional. He dug a grave in a remote corner of Windsor Great Park, a place few people passed, where damp earth could hide footprints and the smell of soil could blend with moss. He bought a huge plastic bin big enough to serve as a makeshift coffin, black tape, bin bags, cling film, and tools to conceal evidence. He worked out the route, the timing, the quiet spots, and the security gaps he could exploit. And one detail is almost suffocating in its brazenness: the murder hammer was carefully hidden in his daughter's school kit. Not in his car or luggage, a cowardly, calculated move that made the weapon look innocuous to neighbors and reduced the chance of inspection. In the weeks before the fateful day, Robert played the part perfectly in public, going to work, sipping tea with colleagues, laughing like the model husband. But at night, he returned to the park to dig and to bury. The split between his professional daytime persona and the filthy secret work he did in the earth reveals a mind that had plotted every step to avoid detection. This was not the drama of someone temporarily unhinged. It was the cold calculation of a person determined to erase every tie, to remove the victim from life, with no chance for her family to recover. Investigators later logged many signs: items bought piecemeal at different stores, small transactions designed to avoid attention, visits to Windsor timed on days with the fewest people, and the way he used his child as a screen, slipping the hammer into her school bag as if nothing were suspicious, exposes a cruelty that's almost unimaginable. Looking at all these pieces together, any sane person must conclude this was a premeditated murder, an intentional plan to end a life to solve a personal problem. It is not only a crime against Joanna, it is a code lesson in how someone with outward power and respectability can manipulate circumstances to carry out the most horrific act. What do you think, knowing everything was prepared down to that level of detail? Leave a comment. Next, we move to the night when every calculation was put into action. At 4 p.m. on October 31st, 2010, the neighborhood of Ascot looked like every other Halloween. Kids knocking on doors, jack-o'-lanterns glowing, laughter echoing through the streets. And no one had the slightest idea that just a few houses away, an unthinkable tragedy was already in motion. Joanna opened the door when Robert brought the children back. Alex and Katie ran straight into the playroom, chattering about their weekend with their dad, completely unaware that in just a few minutes, their lives would split into a before and after no child should ever experience. Robert stepped in behind Joanna. He wasn't carrying his usual cold expression. This time, it was a silence so heavy it made your spine tighten. Joanna led him into the bedroom to talk privately. Maybe she thought she could settle things before the final court hearing. Maybe she believed she had stayed strong long enough that Robert would finally let go. But she had no idea what he had brought with him. The discussion quickly turned into an argument, Joanna's voice rising with fear, Robert's dropping into that flat, steady tone that made it sound like he'd been waiting for this moment all along. And then, without warning, Robert reached into his daughter's school bag. He grabbed the hammer, the murder weapon he had intentionally hidden among a 9-year-old's school supplies. The perfect disguise. Joanna likely never even saw it coming. The first blow landed, then the second, then the third. She fought back, tried to push him away, tried to run, tried to scream. But her small frame stood no chance against a 6'2" man, fueled by hatred and the desperation of a collapsing ego. He struck her 14 times, 14 moments where Joanna fought for her life, for her children playing just 2 doors away. Little Katie heard something, a thud, a crash, something breaking. She peeked down the hallway and softly asked, "Daddy, are you calling an ambulance?" But Robert didn't answer. He never would. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He didn't flinch. He moved like someone carrying out a task he had rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times. Robert took the large plastic sheet he had prepared weeks earlier and wrapped Joanna's body with the cold efficiency of someone packing an object, not a human being. He shoved her into the trunk and closed it without a sound. When he walked back inside, he told the children in the same flat voice, "Mommy's sick. I'm taking her to the hospital." And they believed him, because no child would ever imagine the truth. Robert then drove to Windsor Great Park, the place where the grave he dug was waiting. He dropped Joanna's body into the pit, like discarding an old possession, covered her with dirt and never looked back. And as he patted the soil down, Halloween laughter still echoed through the neighborhood, a cruel, mocking contrast to the horror that had just unfolded. What do you think? How far can a man hide his cruelty in plain sight? Comment below and get ready for the next part, where Robert's lies begin to crumble piece by piece. The next morning, when the last echoes of Halloween had faded and the neighborhood settled back into its quiet routine, the first signs of something terribly wrong began to surface. Joanna was not the kind of woman who ever disappeared without a word, but that day, every text, every call, every attempt to reach her sank into silence. Her family immediately felt a deep, sickening pull in their gut. Something was very, very wrong. They called the police. When officers forced their way into the home Joanna had lovingly built, they were not prepared for what was waiting inside. Blood sprayed across the ceiling, blood smeared down the walls, blood pooling across the floor. Every inch of the room screamed that a brutal fight for survival had taken place, but the most important piece was missing. There was no body. Joanna had vanished, as if erased from her own home, leaving behind only the blood that proved she fought with everything she had. And while police scrambled to chase down leads, Robert Brown, the man who had killed her just hours earlier, walked into the police station with a calmness so chilling it made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. No shaking, no panic, no remorse, no urgency. He spoke in a flat, emotionless tone, as if reporting a lost suitcase. "I'd like to report a family incident." That cold detachment alone was enough to freeze anyone listening. He was taken into an interview room. One session, then another, then another. By the 9th interview, Robert had said nothing but 2 words over and over. No comment, no cooperation, no denial, no explanation. Just the dead-eyed indifference of a man who knew exactly where Joanna was, buried in the earth in the grave he dug himself. Investigators pushed, cornered, tried every technique to break through, but Robert remained a concrete wall, blank, emotionless, repeating the same phrase like a machine. No one could understand what he was trying to accomplish, other than buying time to appear as though he was thinking things over. But then detectives laid the crime scene photos in front of him, blood spatter reaching the ceiling, drag marks across the floor, evidence so damning it suffocated the room. And only when he was completely cornered did Robert finally speak, not to apologize, not to express regret, but to feed them the flimsiest lie imaginable, that he lost control, that he didn't mean to, that he planned to take her to the hospital. A lie so blatant it was insulting. But he did give them one thing, the location of her body. He led police into Windsor Great Park, to the shallow grave he had prepared long before Halloween night. When forensic teams dug it open, Joanna was found inside a plastic storage bin, wrapped tightly like something disposable, not a human being. And Robert's eerie, icy calm in the days that followed sent chills through the entire country. What do you think? How does someone capable of striking a woman 14 times with a hammer stay calm enough to walk into a station and call it a family incident? Comment below and get ready for the next part, where justice seemed within reach, only to turn its back in the most infuriating way. The evidence was overwhelming, so overwhelming that anyone would have thought the verdict was a guaranteed murder conviction. Robert Brown had dug a grave months in advance, prepared the hammer, hid the weapon in his daughter's school bag, ignored his child's desperate plea to call an ambulance, then buried Joanna like discarded trash. Every action, every detail screamed cold, deliberate planning. This wasn't a moment of rage, this was a plan. But in court, Robert crafted an entirely different story, a story he knew the law would sometimes coddle. "I was suffering from an adjustment disorder. I didn't mean to." One neat little sentence, a tidy excuse meant to wash away the brutality of 14 hammer blows as if they were just a passing lapse in judgment. The most horrifying part, the court accepted it. Years of fear, exhaustion, and trauma Joanna endured. Her violent, agonizing death, his calculated cruelty. All of it reduced to 2 words: diminished responsibility. Robert Brown was not convicted of murder. He was convicted of manslaughter. 26 years in prison. Eligible for release in 13, the United Kingdom erupted in outrage. Headlines called the verdict a slap in the face to victims everywhere, an insult to justice. People asked the only question that made sense. If a man can dig a grave, prepare a weapon, kill his wife within earshot of his children, and that isn't murder, then what is? Joanna's family was shattered. Her mother, Diana, stood outside the courthouse with a face twisted by grief as she said, "My daughter was brutally taken from us." And today the court took the last thing she had left, her justice. Joanna's friends cried openly when the verdict was read. Those who loved her felt like they lost her a second time. Her life was stolen by a cold-blooded killer. Her justice was stolen by the very system that was supposed to protect her. And the most chilling truth of all, if no one fought back, Robert Brown, the man who killed his wife with 14 hammer blows while their daughter was steps away, would walk out after 13 years as if nothing had happened. What do you think about this verdict? If you were Joanna's family, how would you feel? Comment your thoughts, because in the next part we witness the relentless fight of a mother who challenged an entire legal system to win back justice for her daughter. But the story of Joanna Simpson does not end in darkness. After a verdict that outraged an entire nation, Joanna's mother, Diana, made a decision that changed everything. She would not let her daughter fade into a statistic. Not as a victim, but as a light for others who had no voice. She created the Joanna Simpson Foundation, an organization dedicated to children who lost a parent to domestic violence. Kids who carry the same wounds as Alex and Katie, Joanna's children, now had a place to be heard, supported, and healed. In 2016, at an event for survivors of abuse, Diana shared Joanna's story with Queen Camilla. The moment Camilla heard that little Katie watched her father load her mother's body into the trunk of a car, she burst into tears. She held Diana's hand and said, "I will do something." It wasn't a polite promise. It was a vow. And she kept it. Years later, Queen Camilla became one of the strongest voices pushing the government to reevaluate how the law treats domestic homicides. At the same time, Alex and Katie, once traumatized children, grew up and turned their pain into purpose. They stood in front of cameras, wrote letters, spoke in Parliament, and became advocates for the thousands who could not speak for themselves. A little girl who once asked, "Daddy, are you calling an ambulance for Mummy?" now stood before the nation, demanding stronger protections for women like her mother. A boy who once stayed silent as his world collapsed now stood before lawmakers, explaining the danger of abusers and the gaping holes in the system. And their voices made an impact. In 2023, the UK government officially blocked Robert Brown from early release, a major victory for the Joanna Simpson Foundation. By 2024, a new domestic abuse and homicide reform law passed, explicitly acknowledging the Foundation's role as a driving force. Joanna died at 46, but her light never dimmed. It grew brighter, wider, stronger. She's no longer here to shield her own children, but her legacy now protects thousands of others. Some acts of evil steal a life, but some people, through kindness and courage, change an entire legal system. Joanna Simpson is one of them, and we, by continuing to tell her story, become the ones who keep that light alive. Do you believe that an ordinary person can change an entire country? Tell me in the comments. The story of Joanna Simpson is a painful reminder that domestic violence spares no one. Not the strong, not the kind, not the deeply loved. The most dangerous person isn't always a shadow on a dark street. Sometimes it's the one who once held your hand, promised to protect you, and wished you good night under the same roof. Joanna trusted the wrong man, and the price she paid was her life. But her light, her kindness, her resilience, her love for her children became a legacy powerful enough to help change the laws of an entire nation. If this story made you stop for a moment, if it left you thinking or feeling that familiar chill, share your thoughts below. What do you think was the most terrifying part of the Joanna Simpson case? The brutality? The premeditation? Or the heartbreaking truth that she cried for help many times, but no one reached her in time? Tell me what you think. And if you want to follow more true crime stories told with absolute respect for the victims, no cheap shock value, no glorifying killers, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because sometimes, the only way to stop a tragedy from happening again is to tell it exactly as it was, honestly, painfully, so we never forget that the smallest cracks inside a family are often the final cries for help. See you in the next story.